God provided a means for the translation process to continue and move forward, and here's how he did it. In the fall of 1828, a man by the name of Oliver Cowdrey came to Palmyra, New York, to be the teacher for the city school there. And as was customary in that time, the teacher would then board at the homes of the various families that sent their children to the school, and they were also paying the salary for this teacher. Oliver heard stories in Palmyra about a golden Bible, about a translation and angels, and while most of the people in Palmyra were mocking and making fun of these stories, it caught Oliver's attention because he, like Joseph, had become pretty discouraged with the religious landscape of the day. And so he requested, after hearing enough of these stories, he requested to get to go and stay with the Smith family, which he did. And he asked questions, and they could tell that he was more sincere. And so they opened up a little bit more with him than they had with others, because they had become quite quiet on a lot of fronts with a lot of people, because every time they said anything, they would bring on persecution. Oliver loved what he was hearing for the most part, and he wanted to somehow be a part of it. And as soon as that 1828 to 1829 school year ended, which would have been much earlier in the spring than what we're used to in our modern culture, sometime in early April or late March, somewhere in there, depending on the year, he decided, I'm going to go to Harmony. So he and Samuel, Joseph's brother, Samuel Smith, walked the nearly 100-mile trek from Palmyra down to Harmony on muddy streets. It was a very wet journey for them on foot, and very cold, by the way. Incidentally, when he arrived, he had a frostbitten toe, and he was excited to finally meet Joseph, the prophet, who he had heard so much about, and now he met him. And it's one of those amazing friendships that was forged almost immediately. Just for context, Joseph is quite tall. He's over 6 feet tall. Oliver Cowdrey's about 5'4". Oliver's 1 year younger than him. And Oliver is extremely gifted with writing, and he's much more learned as far as the world is concerned than Joseph. So they began this process of now translating the rest of the Book of Mormon. Keep in mind, we lost the 116 pages. Jack Welch has done a lot of work and a lot of study on this process, the translation process, and how long it took and what days they're likely to be translating. And it's fascinating when you look at this situation. Picture Oliver Cowdrey coming, and the first item of business that he helps Joseph with is to write a contract for his father-in-law, Isaac Hale, Emma's parents, to say, I will repay you for this land and this home and the spring and the barn that's on Isaac Hale's property that Joseph and Emma are now living in. So that was the first thing Oliver helped him do. And then they began the translation process. Can you imagine being Oliver Cowdrey, having heard about this, when the first things that you hear fall from the lips of the prophet as you're scribing for him are probably the first few chapters that we have in our Book of Mosiah? Picture your introduction to the translation of the Book of Mormon being King Benjamin's speech and the precursors to King Benjamin's speech. Now, picture being Oliver Cowdrey in his situation where he's a school teacher. He doesn't have a lot of money, and he is a little concerned about his physical well-being, and now he's living in the home with a poor farmer who's in debt with a wife, and they're struggling with money. And picture some of these words in their historical context, what it might have meant for those two men performing this work, and Emma, who's listening in much of the time in the room on what's going on. Listen to these words from Mosiah 2. Start in verse 23. Now in the first place he hath created you, and granted unto you your lives, for which ye are indebted to him. And secondly, he doth require that ye should do as he hath commanded you, for which if ye do, he doth immediately bless you, and therefore he hath paid you, and ye are still indebted unto him, and are and will be forever and ever. Therefore, of what have ye to boast? Beautiful words that apply to their situation. But then, at a much deeper level, can you imagine what it might have felt like for Oliver Cowdrey to be dipping that quill in ink and listening to these words as he then puts them to paper in our dispensation? Words like these: For behold, the time cometh, and is not far distant, that with power the Lord omnipotent, who reigneth, who was and is from all eternity to all eternity, shall come down from heaven among the children of men, and shall dwell in a tabernacle of clay. And then go on with this description of Jesus. Can you imagine how sweet it must have been to Oliver to hear these words and to record them as he realizes very early on what he is now a part of, this unfolding of the restoration of the gospel and through this translation process of the Book of Mormon. Back to Oliver Cowdery, the man. He's wrestling with something. He wants a little further witness that this is the Lord's work. Does that tell you something? After everything that we've already talked about up to this point, he's experienced all these things with the translation process in those early chapters of Mosiah, and he's still sitting there, like Martin Harris before him, saying, I need a little more proof. Does that tell you a little bit about Revelation? That it's a process that unfolds and it grows over time. It's not a big flash of light right at the beginning. Now, it was with the first vision with Joseph, but for most of us, it's not that way. It's this unfolding revelatory process. So notice verse 15 and 16. It's hinted here. He says, Behold, thou knowest that thou hast inquired of me, and I did enlighten thy mind. And now I tell thee these things, that thou mayest know that thou hast been enlightened by the Spirit of truth. And then he takes it further in verse 16. Yea, I tell thee that thou mayest know that there is none else save God, that knoweth thy thoughts and the intents of thy heart. So as Joseph is receiving that revelation for him, he is probably thinking, oh, good, God's answering Oliver's question. But then it becomes crystal clear a few verses later. Look at verse 21. Behold, I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Notice how at the beginning of the section, he introduced himself, I am God. Here he clarifies, I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I am the same that came unto mine own, and mine own received me not. I am the light which shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. And now this part. Verily, verily, I say unto you, if you desire a further witness, cast your mind upon the night that you cried unto me in your heart, that you might know concerning the truth of these things. Did I not speak peace to your mind concerning the matter? What greater witness can you have than from God? Brothers and sisters, Oliver is then going to share his full story with Joseph, that part of the story, that back in Palmyra, when he was living in the Smith home, he had poured his heart out to God, and God had spoken peace to him, that this is what he needed to do, was to go down to Harmony and help with this work. And now, Oliver hadn't told anybody about that experience, but now God is explaining exactly that experience. The two who had it together, the Lord and Oliver, they're coming back together in this instance, at which point Oliver says, okay, this is enough. Joseph has revealed things that nobody but God and I alone were aware of. And that was what he needed to be able to help propel him through the rest of this coming forth of the Book of Mormon process.